Welcome to the complete comic book history of the Dark Knight. I am Salazar Knight, and these are years 7, 8, and 9 in the Silver Age of Batman. In the previous episodes of the Silver Bat, we rushed over the first 6 years, and now we end the first 9 Silver Age years with some of the most crazy, ridiculous, and overall foolish stories during the history of Batman. So let's jump right into it. We start off year 7 with Detective Comics 294, in which Batman confronts the Elemental Man, a villain who can transform his body into any material he desires. In the story, Batman also gets this power and he ends up locked in a special cell. However, he turns his body into liquid mercury and manages to escape. Does this concept sound familiar? Well, maybe you remember the T-1000 from Terminator 2. Yes, the idea of this robot being capable of changing his body because he was made of mercury had already been used by Batman 30 years earlier. The more you know. In Batman 141, Robin and Batgirl kiss for the first time in history. The idea of Robin being romantically involved with a young girl was never seriously considered before until Batgirl was introduced, as we mentioned in the previous episode. In this story, Robin tries to protect Batgirl from a criminal called Moth. No, not Killer Moth, just Moth. And when she learns of Robin's good intentions, she gives him a big smooch. This can be considered the start of the love story between Robin and Batgirl. It might not be Barbara Gordon, but the concept is the same and it remains the same to the present day. Meanwhile, in World's Finest 121, The Mirror Batman. And this is quite normal for what's coming next. Detective Comics 298 is a very special issue, not only because it's the first appearance of Matt Hagen, also known as Clayface 2, but also because this is the first issue that was priced for 12 cents. Since the beginning of DC until this moment, every comic was worth 10 cents, but during the Silver Age this price started to change. Anyway, back to Clayface. The original Clayface appeared in the second year of Batman's history, and we have that story in the Golden Bat, but be warned, it's not the best video I've done. Anyway, this new Clayface is different from the original, whose name was Basil Karlo. In this story, Matt Hagen finds a mysterious pool that turns his body into clay and gives him the power to change his body into any shape he wants. A giant eagle, a centaur, you name it. However, these powers only last for 48 hours and he had to return to the pool to renew his powers constantly. This weakness allowed Batman to capture Clayface as he lost his powers during the fight with the Dark Knight. In the end, Clayface is arrested, but he makes a promise to return. Fun fact, Matt Hagen did not come up with the name Clayface. It was the editor of the Gotham newspaper The Gotham Gazette, who decided to make a big headline using the name Clayface for the new criminal. You might also remember that Matt Hagen was the name of the Clayface on Batman the Animated Series. However, that version was a fusion between the first Clayface, Basil Karlo, and Matt Hagen, as he was an actor and his body was made of clay. Now, the original Clayface was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, and this new Clayface was also created by Bill Finger. It's still unclear why Bill came up with another villain called Clayface 20 years after the original character, but my guess is that he didn't remember about the original Clayface, because in this story there is no mention about it. And at this point we start to notice how Bill Finger started to run out of good ideas, and who could blame him? After doing Batman for 20 years, it was bound to happen, and there are many other examples of this, like Mr. Polkadot from Detective Comics 300. Not much to say about him except that he was probably the worst Batman villain and he used a ridiculous costume. And again, this was a Bill Finger creation. But if we talk about ridiculous, Batman number 147 takes the crown. Yes, as you can see in this cover, Batman is turned into a small child and keeps fighting crime as the Bat Baby. I have no words to describe how dumb this story is. And you know what's worse? It's again a Bill Finger story. The same man who co-created Batman now turned him into a baby. This is by far the worst moment in Batman's history and the lowest point of the Silver Age. From a history perspective, DC was trying very hard to remain at the top of the leaderboard, especially considering that Marvel was rising with characters like Hulk, Thor and the Fantastic Four, but honestly, the old-time writers like Bill Finger were absolutely running out of good ideas, and it's natural. At this point, he had been writing for DC for 24 years, and almost always on the same stories. No writer or artist would be allowed to go on for so long in modern times, and with good reason. And finally, we have reached the 9th year of the Silver Age and the 25th year of Batman's entire history. Let's end this with a bang, shall we? First, this year we have Batman 156, which is notable for featuring the story Robin Dies at Dawn. And you thought Dead in the Family was gruesome. If you're not very familiar with this story, well, let's just say that the story is very important to understand the storyline Batman R.I.P. by Grant Morrison. The whole idea of having Batman suffering a mental breakdown was inspired by this story alone, in which Robin dies at dawn. But not really. And fun fact, Robin Dies at Dawn is also the title of the story featured in the last issue of the Robin Volume 4 series, which was part of the Last Rites storyline, The Aftermath to Batman R.I.P. Next, we have the first encounter between Clayface and the Joker in Batman 159. In the story, Joker and Clayface become enemies and they try to prove who is the best villain by defeating Batman. As you can imagine, Clayface transforms into the Joker and Batman has a hard time fighting them both. And you probably know this, but the fake Joker gag was recently used in the video game Batman Arkham City, where, spoilers, Joker hires Clayface to impersonate him and confuse the Dark Knight. And finally, after 9 years of aliens, time travel, space travel, robots and baby bats, here comes the drop that spilled the cup. The Batman creature. This story from Batman 162 is possibly the most ridiculous Batman story ever told, and it is also the end of the first 9 years of the Silver Age. But I need to end this episode of the Silver Bat with a little background history. At this time, Batman and Detective Comics were selling extremely low, to the point where DC considered the cancellation of the books for the first time in 25 years. This is not a coincidence, and it happened for obvious reasons. The first one was that DC redesigned many of their superheroes in the 60s, like Flash and Green Lantern, while old heroes were also improved, like Wonder Woman and Aquaman. The art style in all of their comics was very good compared to Batman, who still looked like he did in the 1940s. The second reason was the direction of the Batman stories. As I mentioned already, there was too much science fiction involved, and Batman was no longer a serious character. Instead, he was often involved with goofy characters like Batmite, or he had romantic encounters with Batwoman. When we compare Batman with the comics that were published back then, you can see why people hated Batman. Not only DC was printing mainly war comics, but also Marvel had recently appeared and they were conquering the market with their characters and realistic approach to their stories. DC had good superhero comics like Justice League, Superman, Green Lantern and Flash, but they were competing against the Fantastic Four, Thor, Hulk, Spider-Man and the X-Men. These were the best comics back then, and you can obviously understand why this Batman was almost disappearing. DC Comics had only two options, to redesign and improve Batman, or to let him die. And if you want to know what happened next, remember to subscribe. That way you won't miss any important detail on the complete comic book history of the Dark Knight.